Hi, folks. Lovely to see you all. So I think you all know, but I'm Andy Agavangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are recording this session so we can share it online for those that didn't have a chance to attend. I really do hope you enjoy it. It's a wonderful film. Hope you've seen it. Whether you have or haven't, I hope you enjoy the conversation. We'll kick off with introductions. I'll then cover off a couple of other housekeeping notes, and then I'll pass over to TTF's head of events, Mr. Gareth Steers, who I'm very pleased to see is with us as well. So that's good. We've actually got more people here than I expected to have, so that's really cool. We've got the ideal number. Okay, so let's deal with introductions first of all. Mr. Nigel Cairns, you can go first. Thank you.
Oh, hi. Well, Nigel Cairns. I'm living in Stockham Farm in Devon.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. Let's go to Mr. Richard Emery.
I'm Richard Emery. I live in Bracknell in Berkshire and investigate bank fraud.
Thank you very much, Richard. He's a very busy man doing that. He does it extremely well. Mr. Tom Levitt, who's breaking his duck tonight. Lovely to see you. Tell us about yourself, Tom.
Thank you. I'm living in Brentford in West London. I have temporarily, at least, a whale as a neighbour. I must have passed the end of the garden yesterday. The one that ended up in Richmond, and the author of a book called The Company Citizen, a writer and consultant on responsible business.
Fantastic. And you're into things like corporate culture and that type of stuff, aren't you?
Yes.
Fantastic. We are going to be having so many conversations, Tom. So many conversations. Let's go to Mr. Andy Aikenhead.
Andy Aikenhead. I'm near Cambridge in the UK. My background's mostly financial services. And for my sins, I even spent a decade as a bond trader. So.
Yes, he's a recovering bond trader. And Andy's a great volunteer within the TTF. He's helping us out on all kinds of things, including measuring impact, and we've got a training initiative getting off the ground, and he's a really good guy, getting very heavily involved. We'll then go to Julia Land. Lovely to see you, Julia. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi everybody. I'm Julia Land. I live in Highgate in North London. And I'm a governance consultant and work with boards, including sometimes asset management boards.
Fantastic, lovely to have you here, Julia. Let's now go to Francisca. Francisca, lovely to see you all the way in Austria. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, I live in Austria and I was a victim of a scam. So I'm not a financial services person, I was a victim.
Thank you very much, Francisca. Great to have you with us. We now go to Kim Schweitzer.
Hi all, I'm Kim Schweitzer. I am an ambassador and volunteer for the Transparency Task Force. Also, I am very into company and corporate culture, so that's very interesting. Tom, you're right down the street from me. I'm living here in East Sheen, and I'm hoping that Brentford comes up. Their football team.
There we go. Let's now go to Michaela. Michaela, please introduce yourself nice and succinctly. Thank you.
Am I on?
We can hear you, Michaela.
Okay, thanks. So I'm in Toronto, Canada, 1 p.m. here. I'm a bit, play tennis all morning. So, well, I worked on the asset management side, corporate. And my background is physics, maths, quant. So I arrived in banking as a risk manager. I'm here to learn, observe, curious about your opinions.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Lovely to have you with us. We now go to Mr. JB Beckett, one of the most senior members of the Transparency Task Force community, who's been a huge ally to the cause for many, many years. JB, great that you're with us. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind, Andy, and good evening, Scotland calling. Nice to see everyone in the TTF. I am a recovering investment risk specialist, having retired after 25 years of service and making penance by serving the TTF.
Thank you very much, JB. We must get around to doing one of these on your book, JB. Tell everybody a bit about your book.
So the book was called New Fund Order. It was all about the dysfunctions within asset management, as I observed them over the space of 20 years, including through the great financial crash. and really about the human condition, or the dysfunctions of the human condition that tends to lead to poor risk taking and bad outcomes.
Thank you very much indeed, JB. Lovely. I think Christoph has got a bad connection because he's coming and going, but hopefully Christoph will join us shortly. Christoph is one of Europe's leading corporate governance experts, and he's a great ambassador for TTF in Poland. Okay, so let me deal with a couple of housekeeping notes. Number one, we are recording this session. It will go out on social media. Number two, please do feel free to use the chat, share contact details, use this as a networking opportunity if you like to. The next point I'd like to make is that our book club session on Thursday, let me share my screen actually, because a few of you might find this interesting, given your asset management interests. So on Thursday, we've got John LeComnick and James P. Hawley's book. The title, I think you can see it there. The title is Moving Beyond Modern Portfolio Theory. It's all about the idea basically that investing for good returns is simply not enough. We need to be investing beyond that. So that's Thursday's session, May the 13th, 6 p.m, same start time as today. And I think that pretty much takes care of everything. So what I'd like to do now is simply invite Gareth Steers to pick up from here. And Gareth, if you can just leave me, say 5, 6, 7 minutes at the end to kind of bring things together, that would be super duper. But I'm going to leave you in the very, very capable hands of TTF's very own head of Film Club. Gareth, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So just a brief introduction. My name's Gareth. I live also in North London in Wood Green, so near to Highgate. I'm a consultant in the pensions law and regulation. That's my day job, but I also studied film at university, so I was an easy candidate for this role. Moving on to the film, I'm going to try and share some slides now. So this working is going to be quite key to the success of this session. So hopefully now you can see some slides for the TTF Film Club. Yep.
So let me view on gallery mode whilst Gareth is sorting his slide deck out. So who hasn't seen the film? Let's do it that way around. That might be the easiest way to do it. Who hasn't seen the film? Just mention your name if you haven't. Wow, looks like everybody has. That's super good.
Andy, I haven't seen the last 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh no!
No spoilers, please.
You've given us spoiler alert here.
That's right. You've given us a massive dilemma now because we don't know whether to tell you or not. Oh, crikey! And Christoph Grabowski has just joined us. So, Christoph, you have he's connecting to audio. Christoph, lovely to see you. Christoph, please take this opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we're going to go to Gareth Steers, who's going to be running the session itself. Christoph, please say hello.
Well, I'm living in Poland, in Warsaw, and I for almost 30 years I'm dealing with on capital market. My main hobby and task which I'm doing is corporate governance. So that film is a lot of about business ethics and corporate governance, business ethics mainly. So it's very interesting for me.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here with us, Christoph, all the way from Poland. Let's now get back to Gareth. If everybody can put themselves on mute whilst not talking, just so we can minimise the unnecessary interruptions. Gareth, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So I think I'm going to give up on the slideshow idea. It doesn't seem to like it, but I think you can, even without the slideshow, there's a few bits around the edges of the screen, but I think you can still see the slides quite clearly. This first one is just to remind us of the film we're talking about. I think everyone's seen it, and it's that tagline I think is quite good and quite useful as well. Be first, be smarter, or most importantly, or cheat. So I'm going to do first a quick sort of refresher of what the plot of the film was, what the story was. So briefly then, So the film begins, well, the whole film is over the course of one night practically, and the following day, it's the story of a Wall Street firm, an unnamed firm, dealing with the realization that it could be about to go bankrupt. It begins with a brutal round of bankruptcies. One of those bankruptcies is Stanley Tucci's character, who on his way out hands a young employee, someone in his team, a thumb drive and says, "Be careful." That employee then takes that thumb drive. It contains a statistical model, which he continues to work on throughout the rest of that day, and then works into the night and then figures out something important, it seems. And that thing, so I gather, is amongst other things, that if the firm's assets in mortgage-backed securities decrease by 25% in value, the firm will owe more than its market capitalization. These aren't things I'm particularly expert in, but I gathered that was bad. So do come in with these slides. Any points when you're watching the film maybe you didn't quite get? This might be a good opportunity to ask a question. I'm sure somebody else probably will be able to help you with that. But moving on.
Richard Emery's raised his hand. Richard, what's your point? Thank you.
Sorry, can I just clarify something on that first slide? You said begins with a brutal round of bankruptcies.
Oh, redundancies.
Do you mean redundancies?
Redundancies, yes, thank you.
That's right. Just anybody who's forgotten how it started, yeah.
That was a test. It's good. Well done.
Just proving I watched the first 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
No. It's a very good point. Could have confused people. So yeah, beginning with those redundancies, and then we get to this point where this young employee realizes there's a big problem in the finances of this firm. So increasingly senior people sort of arrive at the office, find out what's going on, and then decide what to do. So just skipping ahead a couple of slides. First thing, this is the guy who runs the model. He calls his buddy, who's about the same level as him. They then get Paul Bettany involved. He looks at it, then he gets Kevin Spacey involved, and then directors and so on. So it's quite a nice structure, really. It's a good way to sort of explain things, is people keep turning up and they have to keep explaining again and again what's going on. It's quite useful for the audience, I think. But eventually they get Jeremy Irons' character involved, and he's very senior. I think he's chief exec. And the great plan is simply just to sell off all the assets before anyone spots what's going on. This is despite this will wreck the reputation of the firm and do huge damage to the financial sector. Another plot strand is that they need to find Stanley Tucci. The guy who's...
May I have a word?
Sure.
Because it's not exactly like that. They need to find Tucci to threaten him. Tucci does not want to say anything. So they are not afraid that he will jeopardize the sale in that way, but they need his support to perform that sale.
Okay, that's an interesting distinction.
Yes.
That is true, isn't it? Because
the last point in that slide it does not mean that the careers of the brokers will be destroyed, but it means that the career of the brokerage house of the company will be destroyed, but not the career, but the reputation of that broker company will be destroyed. But he knows that after some years, the company will come back.
I'd like to put in a point here, if I may, which is this. I think the decision being made by the brokers about whether to make those phone calls or not is actually the very kind of central point in the film, because the way I took it was they were being given an opportunity, make a shed load of money, a lot of money, and the numbers were very, very significant, make an astronomical amount of money, but you are going to be disliked, unwelcome by everybody that calls you, by everybody that you phone, because they will know that you called them with a view to getting rid of this rubbish and it was going to cause them harm. So there was a very direct trade-off between doing the wrong thing but being paid a fortune to do it. So I think that their careers were probably going to be ruined because their reputations at an individual level with the people they were interacting with would be ruined. So it's a very, very interesting point, and I think JB's put his hand up as well. JB.
Yeah, but you see that the problem is that the partners afterwards will know that they were cheated. And the problem in the film is whether we can cheat our partners, but not only our partners, because it's not a problem for our partners, but it is the problem for the clients of our partners.
Yes.
Who will buy those instruments. So in that way, our reputation, the broker's reputation will be broken. Will be jeopardized, but in short time, they will earn a lot of money for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you,
so
Christoph.
in a long period, the company will come back to the business. So some of them will come back to the business in the company also. Some of them will lose the job, but they will earn a lot of money.
And we'll go to JB in a moment, but I think that the question you find yourself watching as you're thinking about as you're watching the film is, would you do it? Would you take the money or not? It's just an intriguing question because it's such huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
Really interesting. JB's in there. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the film brought back an awful lot of bad memories.
Really?
I'll be honest,
Jeez.
and you have to set the context of what had happened in bond markets in the run up to the Great Financial Crash. We saw a period of significant bond tightening, really from about 2003 to 2005. That's what then started to lead to increased risk-taking into asset-backed security markets. But actually, I thought you made an interesting point. For me, actually, the core point of the film was the incorrectly placed faith in models. Models was very much the moral of the margin call, because for such a long period of time, models were used by executive as a way to justify that a level of risk was acceptable as long as it remained within the model. But the models were indeed flawed and actually came into direct criticism by the joint supervisory group post-Great Financial Crash. And I'm obviously talking about models like value at risk, where they estimate the expected loss. And you'll have seen that getting mentioned in the film, what they expected the deviation to be. And once it went over a certain level of deviation, which we would call in risk sigma, then the balance sheet no longer could cover the call. And that was the problem. It was this over-reliance on models. To some degree, an over-reliance on quant, but quant that wasn't with common sense. And the problem was you had very good quant in the risk teams, but the executives were not listening to them. And this was the problem. And this is actually a repeating pattern. It's not just specific to what happened in the Great Financial Crash. Anytime we're in late cycle, you see this repetition of behavior. So for me, the core theme was one of model risk, but also, frankly, just the incompetence of executives not being able to understand the good advices of some of their own quants.
Wow. we're getting a real masterclass. This is fantastic input, JB.
And that's from bitter experience, I have to say.
Yeah. I hadn't twigged that you'd lived and worked through this. Gareth, we've got Tom Levitt and Andy Aikenhead wanting to speak as well, but rather than me managing that, if I pass this back to you to take care of, thank you.
I mean, I think maybe I saw Tom's hand first, probably. So, Tom, do you want to go next?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, what I was wondering at the start of the film was Stanley Tucci obviously knew that the bonds were worthless, and clearly, when everyone else realised it, they were so dependent on those bonds that pushing them out into the market was possibly going to dilute the impact. That's the sort of generous interpretation of what they were trying to do. But surely when they put these bonds together, they would have known how dangerous they were and how useless, how worthless they were, and therefore how dangerous. And it was going ahead on that basis and trading them as though they were normal commodities is what I found odd. And why didn't Tucci know before and tell people before this that that's what was happening? I wasn't involved in the finance industry at the time. I was a very junior member of Gordon Brown's government at the time. And throughout the crash, I was in 2 meetings a week with Alistair Darling, just being briefed on what was going on. So I was rather seeing things from a different point of view. But what I thought was great about the film was it really went to the heart of where the fuel for the crash actually came from.
Why don't we see? Does anyone have a sort of a response to that point? I don't know if yours is along similar lines, Andy, or if you're sort of raising a different point, maybe we give people a second to respond to Tom's.
It's kind of, I guess my point kind of covers that a little bit, and it sort of was nudged a little bit by JB's point. I mean, initially, I guess when they had that pep talk before they started the sale, he did make that point, I think that you made, Gareth, that their careers were threatened in a sense, or were, and it's interesting because I think JB's point about models and recurring patterns, you go back to 97, I think it was, in long-term capital management, and there was a reliance on models. They were, I think, something like, I heard somebody quote a number the other day actually, and it was wrong, but it was something like 120 times leveraged at the time. I can't remember the actual number, but it was a ridiculous amount. And it was on the back of Myron Scholes' models, and bizarrely John Gutfriend, who's ex-Salomon, just didn't get, I think somehow had lost the perspective that actually markets matter. Markets are two-way things, and that's the point that Kevin Spacey made. You buy and sell, and actually the market isn't just there at your behest. So actually, once you take the view that actually it's there to serve you rather than you're part of it, then you lose the trust of the market. What's also interesting is that I think JB made the point about bonds tightening. What also happened in that period, actually probably from about 2005, I think, is basically trust went out of the market. So you got a market that markets that were built on trust, and it had just by 2007 it had completely gone out of the market. So if you think about banks actually borrowing and lending unsecured to each other, which is what they used to do, in billions of pounds or billions of dollars wherever you were in the world, overnight in these short-term periods, completely unsecured, that had just gone. So it's why Lehman's actually had a massive collateral on their books, for example, that needed a lot of unwinding. But actually this whole thing about trust and markets was, I think, a fundamental element to what happened. I mean, there's certainly a little bit of unrealism in their fire sale as well, by the way. I mean, you don't just go and say 375 million at 65 basis points, done. And I remember hearing a risk manager give a talk on liquidity management years ago. This was well before that. And he was talking about valuing a bond. And it was actually at a time, he was talking about a Malaysian debt crisis in, I think, 98. And he said, we had it was a German bank, $5 million on our, $5 million of this bond on our book. and we valued it at 100 basis points over, I think it was. And my comment to him as a conference was actually, I think you're making a mistake, because actually what happens is you can only sell 1 million of that. You sell 1 million at 100 basis points over, the next price is 200 basis points over. You know, in that kind of market, just size just disappears. So you can't do that, you know, that kind of trade. People just, you know, however macho they feel, they get to a point where they do big trades, and then as things start to happen, that kind of liquidity just disappears. Anyway, that was kind of.
You see, that problem which we are now discussing is currently it's a trivial problem. It's known for several companies. Several companies make business in that way. But what was for me the most interesting in that film was the problem of Lucci. How had he seen that situation? Let's remember that in the very beginning, he was fired, brutally fired from the company. He was, in that moment, he was in the process of recognizing the problem, but he did not finish it yet. So he did not want to disclose the whole problem to his bosses. But as we can understand from the other part of the film, he signaled that before, that there may be a problem with those bonds, with those instruments, because they were not simple bonds. And he was very, very loyal to the company, because he was very brutally fired in 5 or 10 minutes, but he still wanted to tell the bosses about that problem. So that's why he gave that information to his colleague and asked him, well, please study that problem. And then his problem was not his real problem, was not the function of the company in the future, but whether he should agree with cheating the clients, the buyers.
So
finally, his decision was, well, I would never agree to that. Please remember that when his colleague came to him and they talked a lot about that, he did not agree. But finally, the bosses sent the car, and
he was bought.
Told him, well, you need the money, because if you not go with us, you will be bankrupt. And that was the final argument. He agreed to cheating the clients, the buyers.
I think that's great stuff. I think we've got JB and Kim wanting to talk as well. Let's go to JB, then to Kim.
Thanks, Andy. I think there was a very small detail. I mean, sometimes things get missed on the editing floor with these films, but there was a very small detail, an early exchange, if you recall, between Eric Dale and his boss, who was played by Demi Moore, which alluded to there had been an exchange or a memo the year prior. And my read of his redundancy, let's be honest, his sacking, was this was retribution for him rocking the boat at an earlier point. And the inference was that Demi Moore's character had quashed that concern. So actually, as he's leaving the door, it wasn't so much that he hadn't actually already called foul. It's because he had already called foul, had his knuckles wrapped, and now you saw this defeated man effectively being removed. And you could almost see the realization on his face as he was leaving the building. And I think this was ramifications for calling foul earlier. And that is a very real indictment, unfortunately, with our industry. It is tough, frankly, for risk staff who do tend to see the trade from the opposite side to be forceful enough to escalate and push, because usually you go far enough and it's the chief investment officer or the chief trading officer or the chief sales officer who then gets to decide what to do with that. So risk escalation prior to Great Financial Crash was horrendous. You didn't have many chief risk officers, and those that did exist, frankly, didn't have much in the way of teeth at board level. So, so that was one small point I did spot.
Really interesting.
Interesting, JB. Kim, you've had your hand up a little while, so do you want to come in now?
Okay. So I guess just a couple things about the traders that were given the choice of, well, do you want to, are you with us or are you not? I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, but if they didn't sell the positions that they held, that the positions would have been sold anyway. They just would have been given to somebody else to sell it. And if they had walked out, would clients have been angry with them anyway? So was there a lose-lose for either selling them or walking out and not letting clients know that they probably had worked with for a number of years? The other thing I thought was interesting was Kevin Spacey's character not even thinking about saying anything to his son, who obviously his organization lost out. And finally, with Tucci's problem, the missing piece, I was wondering, you know, if he'd been working on this thing for so long and he handed it over to somebody who worked for him and they figured it out in a matter of hours, then certainly there's not teamwork where the missing piece could have been found out a long time before that if he had just gotten the people who had worked for him involved. So it's not only about your expertise, but a teamwork approach might have helped.
Mike, on your second point, actually, that's a very good point, and one that was very easy to miss from the film. So at the end of the film, Kevin Spacey's talking to his ex-wife, and he asks her about how his son had got on, with the inference being that he'd given him no warning whatsoever that they were going to be dumping all this stock, and he'd actually taken a bit of a battering from his dad's firm, and kind of gives you an idea of where the loyalty lies. So that was, yeah, that's a very good point to raise. Also, briefly on your first point, I do agree that I think if you're on that brokerage team and you make a stand, then everyone else in the team likely is going to be selling those stocks anyway, and you probably get burnt in both ways. You don't get the bonus, but are you going to be rewarded for that act by, you know, maybe getting a job in another firm? Quite possibly not. So people didn't seem to have much choice in that team.
This is such an interesting conversation. It really is. This is the dilemma that whistleblowers find themselves in. Yeah, you know, honourable, ethical, righteous people who know that something wrong is going on in the firm they're working for, and they want to tell somebody, and they know very often that when they do tell somebody, they're taking a risk. They don't know what it's going to mean to them. They don't know what it's going to mean for their careers and therefore for their families. And some of these poor souls have quite literally ended up having years and years and years of torment as a direct consequence of doing the right thing. And it is so easy, isn't it, to fall into the trap, frankly, I would say, to fall into the trap of saying to yourself, yeah, but if I don't sell it, somebody else will, so I might as well. But and
I wasn't even thinking about it that way. I was thinking that if they had walked out and they didn't tell their clients what was coming, that reputation, you know, they would have that reputational risk as well.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
clients would expect, well, if we had this relationship, how come you didn't tell me before somebody else picked up the phone and called me?
Exactly. They're in a really awkward.
They're in a
awful,
really terrible position.
a very,
I think
very
there's
awful position.
Hobson's choice, isn't there, all over the film, which is
Yeah.
one of the great things that it turns on. And taking your point, Andy, you know, if you are the whistleblower, there's quite a chance in that scenario that we were watching on the film that the person you whistleblow to might not actually understand what it is they're looking at. I mean, Kevin Spacey and probably Jeremy Irons, the chief exec as well, didn't really understand it. And I think, you know, most salesmen, they'd quite happily, after a while, rock up somewhere else. And I think any salesman would, in that sort of scenario, would know this is what we just have to do. Otherwise, we're completely cutting our throats in terms of our own jobs without even trying to go down with all guns blazing and fighting. It's kind of what you're hired to do, which is a fairly horrendous situation. But you know, Kevin Spacey had the choice, as did Paul Bettany. But they knew what the choice was, but they decided to play for themselves rather than the greater good. I have to just say as well, my son does the most amazing impression of Jeremy Irons. So that scene where he's talking to them round the board table and saying, "Has the music stopped?" He's downstairs cooking, otherwise I'd get him on to do it. Yeah.
I do see that problem in a little bit different way, because you see, I'm not fluent in English, so maybe I did not understand everything correctly. But what I did understand is that those bonds or instruments were written in the books of the company. So they were not owned by the clients of the company. They were owned by the company itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the company was in the process of smooth distributing those assets to the clients. But at the moment, those they were assets of the company. So it was not a problem of leaving the clients of the company with bonds with no value, but it was simply the problem of bankruptcy of the company itself. So I can see that problem, the Tucci problem, which should he be loyal to his colleagues, because if the company will go bankrupt, his colleagues will lose their jobs, and they will stay workless. But another side of the problem was, well, so to help my colleagues, can I cheat the future clients? That was the real problem. What I do understand. There was also there was also another problem, which is dying dog. So
dying dog.
Finally, he was more impressed with his dying dog than with those cheated partners and clients.
Thank you. Let's jump to Andy and JB. I think they've got their hands up as well. Andy, thank you.
Yeah, so I just go back a step. I think, Kim, were you asking if they didn't sell, who would sell? Was that kind of what you were implying earlier?
Well, I guess I was implying that if they had relationships with clients, that potentially other people would have picked up those relationships to then sell what was on the books. So, and maybe that's not the case.
So the way it worked, technically, as it were, was actually, so most of the people they would have sold to would have been other brokers or investment banks. So you heard Paul Bettany, calling up Deutsche and Merrill, and I think at one point Zurich, but certainly you also had these pseudo clients, people like AIG, who were technically should have been, if you want, a buy side firm, but actually were heavily invested in. But they actually, you got these guys on the desk because they just work like banks at the trading side, and they thought they were big swinging whatever, and they would actually. I've had it with the World Bank making me a price back actually as a trader, because they had such big, effectively they had such a lot of capital at play in the market that I was working in. So you can almost ring some clients up, and basically these things traded at a spread to treasuries, which is what's quoted, right? So to the US Treasury of that maturity. And so given that those spreads were quite visible, so if you move fast enough, you can actually unload it, but most of the people you'd be unloading it to wouldn't really be the kind of people we'd think of as clients. It doesn't mean to say that at the end there is an impact. I mean, this is the whole thing, is we know that psychologically there's a disconnect between markets and the real economic world, but actually there's a real impact.
So you're saying then, if they chose not to sell, they would have kept their reputation then? If they had
they're in a real, it's between a rock and a hard place, because basically you choose to go out and screw the market, and therefore the people who you deal with day to day see you as somebody who's not to be trusted. So that's your career at that side. You refuse to do it, and you're still seen as somebody who doesn't do the
Well, that's true, yeah. Because who's going to hire you?
It's in the US as well, and it's not like the UK or Europe. Basically, your employment is as long as the day you work. You can be shown
that is
the door.
True.
You can be shown the door on the day.
Yep. You can be. Having come from there, you can be.
I think we've got JB's hand up. JB, back to you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the points Andy was making, and I found myself on the wrong side of the sword after the GFC, so I know exactly how that is. You get the call, and literally within half an hour later, you've handed back your BlackBerry, you've handed back your laptop, and you're sort of floating down towards the train station, not exactly understanding what's happened. It's pretty bad. The other thing I think to Kim's point, I think it was you, Kim, about whether Eric Dale could have passed on his project as it was, his concerns onto his junior staff. Don't forget, I worked for a while, thankfully relatively briefly, in Barcap. The problem within some of those big investment banks, as you know, is that staff can be very quickly constrained by non-disclosure agreement. And I always felt sometimes you're working in those organizations that actually people were working for 4 or 5 different organizations. You could be sitting beside someone and your perspective as to what was going on in the company was completely different, just depending on which side of the NDA you were. And just so you know, the way these NDAs were generally done, you were taken into a room with your senior and legal counsel, and you were read the riot act as to what would happen if you breached NDA. So there was a culture of fear as to how information was disseminated, and like I say, that became quite problematic for raising concerns about risks or indeed whistleblowing.
Oh, I thought the guy who figured it out actually worked for Tucci. Did he not?
He did, but this is the problem. I mean, I've worked where my senior is not aware of what I am working on under NDA. Wow. Because a VP or director's come across and I've been brought into room with, yeah, exactly.
I've never seen that situation. How about that? Which is why we come to these conversations. We always are learning.
Awkward. And I think Tutti, and I think in Eric Dale, in his character form, it was because he was at that point. I think his project probably would have stayed on his desk and perhaps in his box probably for a much longer period of time, but because in that moment we felt personally betrayed, because I think he felt he was trying to defend the firm by raising concerns firstly, and then frankly biting his lip. I think in that moment when he felt betrayed, that's what instigated him to then.
Oh, that's interesting. See, I was looking at it at a completely different way. That you know, if you had a team working with you, then wouldn't you be better off having multiple brains working on it rather than just the one expert?
Absolutely, and I see Eric Dale, and slightly different perhaps to others here. Eric Dale was complicit in the problem. Just because you know, it's like Teddy Roosevelt. Just because you know the right the right thing to do, if you don't do it, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. Just because he had worked out there was a problem, in retrospect, he didn't act upon it properly. And that, I think that was a running theme for, it was amazing how I think when they got into the really sharp conversations, how many people knew there was a problem around that table.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there seemed to be a lot.
That's it. So we come to this, I think we keep coming back to the central question. How much is the film about the ability for people to be bribed to do the wrong thing if they're given enough money to do it? That to me is a central film. We'll go to Christoph and then we'll jump to another tangential point, which is this. I personally think there are some parallels between the film and what is happening right now with the Green Seal Capital scandal. I'll come to that in a minute, but let's go to Christoph first. Christoph.
Well, I think that the bribery is not a right word to describe the situation, because from the film, I do believe that if Tucci had no obligations to the company, he would not decide to do what he did. But he knew he had to pay a lot of money to the company if he does not agree with the proposals. With the proposal, so his son will be broken. Career, his son will be broken, etc., etc., etc. So, but the real problem, as I can see that, is relations between dealers. Because normally when there are two dealers which are discussing the contract, one dealer knows something and expects something. The other dealer knows something, has some different information, and his expectations may be different. That's why they one of them sells the instrument, the other buys that instrument. Because the first one expects that the price will go down, the other expects that the price will go up. But they have some kind of trust that they don't cheat themselves. But this situation is whether we should cheat our partners, those other dealers, because we know for sure that our assets are worthless, and we are selling our worthless assets for some money, for some big money. That's why the reputation will be broken for a long time.
Wow, the film really does open up so many topics of conversation. If I had my way, if I had a magic wand, there's probably half a dozen films I would get every new entrant into the financial services sector to watch to give them some context. I've put a note about Green Seal in the chat, and Tom, you've drawn an interesting parallel between the UK Green Seal approach and what's been going on in the US. Tom, would you be happy just to elaborate on that point, please, and share your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Well, I was contrasting I can't remember the guy's name now, but there were people very high in Goldman Sachs who were very close to ministers in the Labour government, but it was all very open. You know, they were sort of being there on a consultancy basis, and they were people who were sympathetic, had enough in common anyway to be looking for common solutions. It was the openness I think was important. With Greensill, you've got a situation now where we don't know who certain people were being employed by. You know, one moment they were employed by government, the next moment they're employed by Greensill, apparently against the rules, but you can't actually put your finger on where they move from one to the other. So it's much more insidious, but it's in a context, I think, in my note, I just mentioned the American parallel, where businesses together, not just the finance industry, but businesses altogether spend $5 million per year per congressman on lobbying. That is one hell of a lot of money, and they do literally buy congressmen in the way that just does not happen over here. And it seems to me that Greensill were taking that American route, which works out probably cheaper for them than in order to buy influence than the more open way. But obviously, we prefer to see the open way, being open and clear about it.
For sure, for sure. And I hadn't realised, but Nigel's had his hand up for a while. Forgive me for making you wait, Nigel. What are your thoughts, please, Nigel?
Just one comment. It seems to me a common theme seemed to be the dual dynamic of greed and fear at the same time. It's never just the one thing, and this seemed to be a theme throughout all the echelons of the players in the bank. They all had something to gain and they all had something to lose. And it seems to me that one of the things that hasn't been really emphasized is the situation of the brokers who are expected to sell the Duff stock, that if they didn't, they'd probably be finished in that bank and any other bank, because they wouldn't be reliable actors and wouldn't be trusted by anybody. And I think this is, you know, probably quite true at the moment as well.
This speaks to the point that a lot of whistleblowers experience. They blow the whistle and they find themselves unable to get a job, with a very often a huge reduction in their employability.
Well, of course, it's very deliberate.
It is. It's pretty sinister as far as I'm concerned. Pretty sinister as far as I'm concerned. Anyone else? We've got a little bit of time left. I think this is a conversation that could run and run and run. Who else would like to make
just one more thing? Actually, I'd like just to ask Gareth. He was talking about the particular timing of the film and the diminution in the trust between the traders, and things were getting very febrile. How does he see the situation just at the moment that we find ourselves in globally by comparison to that time?
I'm not sure this is one for me, really.
Or anybody.
Yeah, I would put it out to the floor. I think it is worth asking the question, what's changed?
JB made a good point, actually, that although, which is actually that we've got traders now who didn't live through the financial crisis. However, I think the implicit in your point, JB, I was just looking, was also the lack of learning. If you look at all the events, and, you know, I lived through the '87 financial crisis. I was actually a trader at that point. And actually, the market I worked in had gone through a similar disruption, obviously not to the same scale, a year before that, the floating rate note market. And we'd actually seen it coming. So we'd positioned, we were short of it was about $100 million worth of paper at the time. And we actually tried to persuade customers to sell ahead of it, actually. And it was amazing how many resisted, because they thought this stuff, which was essentially, these were effectively perpetual floating rate notes. So they were actually equity in a sense, but what your return was based upon interbank market rates at the time. So it was cheap equity for the banks, and there was billions of it, mostly placed with other banks around the world. And you know, it was clear that I think people begin to realize that this stuff, which was actually not not senior debt. It was actually, was actually vulnerable. We saw it coming, but actually lots of people didn't. The Japanese banks were still repackaging it over a decade later, and bouncing it around the world to avoid reporting the losses on it. It was amazing the stuff that was going on. But yeah, in terms of now, I think you've still got the same hiring culture in trading rooms, but it's difficult. I'm not that close to it these days.
And there's a lot of the same reward culture there, isn't there? And I guess that's the thing that was never really changed. So much of the money that was pumped into the system did end up just back where it where it had been before. So the disincentives were never really put in place, perhaps on trading floors as such.
Yeah, and hardly anybody went to jail as a result.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, only last week, talking about this theme of could it happen again, only last week, Dame Angela Eagle MP was speaking at a Treasury Select Committee hearing about Greensill. I think it was last week. And she basically said the whole shadow banking scenario is, ripe for causing another massive crisis. We've run several events where top world-class economists have basically said shadow banking, unregulated banking is out of control, and it's a tinderbox ready to go. And it was quite fascinating here. Angela Eagle MP make this very point last week in a Treasury Select Committee hearing. JB's got his hand up. JB?
I'm just going to make this point because this is the thing, right? We keep hearing references to shadow banking. What is shadow banking? Well, it's asset management. It's the industry that's right in front of us right now. The difference now is it's significantly larger than what it was at the Great Financial Crisis, and many of us here know the big defining difference now is you have a asset management sector that doesn't have at least some remnants of discipline of what we saw from the prop trading of the large banks, shoring up some of the daily liquidity. You've got asset management, not necessarily constrained by the same rules, that have gone gangbusters, gotten larger. All that's happened is many of the instruments have just become ever more complex. I mean, one of the biggest fears, obviously, which was touched on in the film, is one of collateralization. Take a bunch of crappy loans and mortgages of people who are possibly likely to default in a downturn, in a recession, etc., but package them all up together, claim and wave the big flag of diversification and hope that everything will be okay. That is now bigger today than it was pre-GFC. So when people say they have concerns, that's why they have concerns. The only thing that stops us going back through that liquidity event, we should have gone through one during the pandemic, is because money became so easy globally. Basically, the central banks just pumped in the money. It's the methadone for the masses, and everybody's happy. They don't seem to care that an actually good piece of debt, a good bond or a government bond or something, basically pays you nothing. In fact, you pay it money over the long run after effects of inflation. So now we're just all investing in crappy, super exotic soups that frankly no one understands. And when it eventually comes all asunder, we wonder, oh, why did that happen? We are destined just to repeat the same past mistakes, I'm afraid.
I think that's one of the similarities with Greensill, because again, involves securitization, and on this, in this case, other types of parties on the other side, Credit Suisse and so on. Again, asset managers.
And if I may, Julia, one of my main concerns actually right now is effectively the carte blanche that's been written by politicians and regulators for green finance. Now, the purposes of green finance are very well intentioned and indeed something that we have to embrace, but it is generating one of the most inefficient periods of investing. I was asked to look at a green bond with a solar project belaying it. Crap would be doing it massive credit. I'm sorry, it was utter crap, not paying enough, with dodgy capital structures, dodgy directors. I'm sorry, if that's what some of our portfolios are sitting on, I have serious concerns.
So it's lipstick on a pig.
Lipstick on a pig.
A green lipstick on a pig. That's my fear.
I wonder if that's the first time those words have ever been put together in that particular context before. The reason I'm sharing my screen, folks, is because JB just mentioned something which reminded me. We, TTF, presented a white paper in the House of Commons to the Bank of England and all sorts of other important folk. The paper was called, here we go. It was Ideas to Help Reduce the Chance of Another Global Financial Crisis. Do you remember that one, JB? Yeah. And it's a really good paper. I'm being immodest here. I've got nothing to do with it technically, but it's a really good paper. We had about 45 very, very bright people involved with it, including some tip-top economists. And I'm pretty sure we covered, yeah, we did. Here we go. Shadow banking. There's a whole section on point number 13. It covers this whole issue of the terrible, terrible risks associated with shadow banking. We covered it there. I'll put a link to this in the chat in case it's of interest to anybody. We've just gone past 7 o'clock, so we'll be wrapping up quite shortly. I personally think that this film is actually an important film because it really does bring to the surface the point made so well by Nigel about if you have a combination of fear and greed, that's a very, very potent combination. And so many people in that movie did the wrong thing knowingly because they were motivated to do so by one or both of those two very, very powerful forces, fear and greed. And you know what, folks? The last part of our conversation about, could this kind of thing happen all over again? I think it could. I really do think it could. Whether it's shadow banking or something else, the massive widespread collapse of the system could happen all over again. And the economists I speak to all say the same thing. There's far less suspension in the system now than there was 2007, 2008. There's far less capacity to absorb shocks than we had before. So we came dangerously close to widespread meltdown last time. Who knows, something similar could happen again. And it's really driven by the ability of people to be motivated, stroke bribed to do the wrong thing. Even the people in the film who initially said, I won't do that, it's wrong, came round. And I think the film makes this point really well. It's a superb movie. I really do think it is. We're happy to keep open for another 5 or 10 minutes or so if people want to carry on chatting. Would anybody else like to say something at this point? It looks like we're pretty good. Let me pass to Gareth. Gareth, would you like to make any closing comments? I mean, you're not somebody who kind of is focused on this particular part of the industry. So what did you kind of pick up out of it? Because I'm really keen to get your own perspective, Gareth. Thank you.
I mean, the closing point I was thinking of making, actually, one point before that is there were loads of other topics we could have covered. Just another 5 minutes would never have cut it. Yeah. And that's a good thing about the film is it opens up so much you could potentially talk about. But the one thing I thought might be a good closing point, which is sort of apropos to the idea of could it happen again? I just think in 10 years' time, we'll probably be here talking about another film called Shadow Bank or something, and it will be about the crisis of this year or next year and how everyone could have spotted it. Lots of people knew about it, but everyone made the wrong decision and they chose greed. And lots of wise heads at the end of the film will say, it happened before. I was there for 2008 and I'm here for this one. And there'll be another one. And it really doesn't feel like this sort of boom and bust and this cycle is really going to change unless something really dramatic changes. So that's sort of my 2 pence, if you like, to close it up. You've made a good point that the next film is actually just in 2 weeks' time. Normally these are monthly, but we didn't have one in April, I don't think, and we've got 2 this month. So 2 weeks from today, we'll be back to talk about Boiler Room. Yeah, one I haven't seen yet myself, actually, so I'm looking forward to watching that this weekend. And I'm sure it's also going to raise lots of issues we can talk about.
Thanks, Gareth. Thank you so much. If anybody finds a free source of Boiler Room, please do let us know. And I'm extremely proud to tell you all that an award-winning documentary called The Corporation, which was made several years ago, some of you would have seen it, we're in direct dialogue with the producers of the film who are producing the new corporation. And if all goes to plan, we are going to be providing a kind of an exclusive pre-launch viewing for TTF members. I'm really, really excited about that. It'll be a massive TTF Film Club night. I can't share the link with anybody. I'm not allowed to, but I have seen the film and it is absolutely awesome. I saw it on Saturday. So that's the new corporation. Boy, is it hard hitting. Gareth, huge thanks to you. I know you put a fair amount of effort and time into preparing this as always. Can we please show our appreciation to Gareth as always? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth.
We are very, very lucky to have Gareth as our
Very much.
TTF head of film club. Remember on Thursday, we've got book club. We're doing all we can to engage, entice, educate, inspire, and all the rest of it. If anybody has any ideas about what else we can do or how we can do what we currently do better, please do feel free to say. We're always open to learning. So all the way from Poland, Christoph, everybody else in the UK, thank you all very much indeed. Have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.